Part 11. Pirate Plant Fruit. Author, Lee A Dream. Chapter 107. The five men charged towards the king's army. Rog rushed into the king's army. Waving his fist would knock a king's army major away. The body collided among the king's army like a crushing force. Crowds of king's army were knocked flying and trampled flat. Rog was like entering no man's land, rampaging and defeating the king's army. Dalton also turned into a beast form, and a tall black yak rushed into the king's army. Luffy jumped up and used Rubber Storm to sweep and suppress the king's army. Sauron wielded his two swords and slashed through the king's army. Sanji uses his feet to focus on enemies using machine guns and artillery. The king's army is not vegetarian, except for the constant shooting. They also simply used rifle bayonets and sabers for hand-to-hand combat. 5 people attacked among the king's army of more than people. It was like 5 stones hitting the sea, causing huge waves. Jess looked at the bloody sides on the battlefield. Dalton and the thieves are really powerful, Jess said. Jess took off the longbow from his back, and took a basket of bows and arrows from the officer at the side. Now is an important time to join the battle, Jess said. Jess first pointed the bow and arrow at Rog, who was charging bravely. Rog had always felt very humiliated when he defeated an army of people that he personally led. This time Jess wants to wash away the shame. Jace attached a red spherical arrow to a meter-wide long bow. Jess shot the bow and arrow at Rog. The bow and arrow hit Rog, and the explosion became a ball of fire. Where did the bow and arrow come from? Rog used his arms to protect his head and chest. Rog looked in the direction of the bow and arrow, and saw that Jess was aiming at himself with the longbow. It's him again. But this guy is really tricky, Jess said. Rog is very aware of the power of the bow and arrow made of wobbly alloy shot by the opponent. At this time, Sauron also happened to rush to Rog's side. Hey, is that Commander Jace? Zoro said. That's him, Roger said. I'll go meet him, Sauron said. Zoro quickly approached Jace. Jace was now resetting his bow. Jace's bow and arrows are black and sharp, made of pure Vabel alloy. Shoot you to death with one arrow. The bow and arrow on Jace's longbow have been shot. Zoro held the 2 knives tightly in his hands, and when Jess' bow and arrow shot over, the 2 knives suddenly turned into a cross shape. Jess' bow and arrow were also blocked. Although Jess's bow and arrow are fast, Sauron's swordsmanship is also as fast as light and shadow. After Sauron swung his 2 knives to block Jace's first arrow, he continued to charge towards Jace. Jace shot a new bow and arrow with a white spherical arrow on the longbow. The arrow was shot again, and Sauron swung his knife to block it. The arrow had just met Sauron's blade. After a while of explosion, the arrow exploded and formed a huge cloud of smoke. Huge smoke enveloped Sauron and his surroundings. At this moment, Jess put 3 black wobbly alloy bows and arrows on the longbow. The smoke hadn't dissipated yet, and Jess and the surrounding officers and soldiers of the king's army could clearly see it. Zoro held knives in both hands and held one in his mouth. The 3 blades spun like a windmill. 3,000 worlds of the secret of 3 sword styles. Zoro performed one of the strongest moves of the 3 sword style. Sauron's 3-blade sword aura formed like a windmill, blowing away the disgust. Jace stared intently at Sauron's flawless sword moves like windmills. 3 arrows fired in unison. The 3 black Vabel alloy bow arrows on Jace's longbow shot out. 3 black bows and arrows shot to the middle of Sauron's body. It happened to be in the center of the blade storm formed by 3 blades. The 3 black bows and arrows were not blocked by the sword energy. 3 swordsmanship and 3 swords in one. Sauron's 3 blades that were rotating like a windmill suddenly cut to 3 positions obviously. These 3 positions are exactly where the opponent's 3 bows and arrows shot. The 3 bows and arrows were all shot down by Sauron's 3 blades amidst the sound of gold and iron. Sauron took advantage of the 3 bows being blocked, and quickly rushed to the front of Jess. 3 swords to kill ghosts. Sauron's figure rushed over like a ghost, and the terrifying 3 blades sealed off the possibility of Jess escaping. Jess had a look of fear on his face, and his wavy mouth couldn't speak. 3 puffing sounds, accompanied by 3 streams of blood flying. Sauron's body was already behind Jess. Jace's neck was severed, and his chest was chopped off in 2 fatal wounds. Jace collapsed onto the snow. Sauron turned around and looked at Jess. "It's finally resolved, it's really dangerous," Sauron said. Sauron successfully defeated Jace, and the king's army of several thousand people suddenly became leaderless. The king's army, who saw all this, quickly became very frightened. "Commander Jace," many of the king's officers and soldiers said in horror. In addition to being the commander, Jess is also the highest combat effectiveness among these king's armies. Now that Jess was killed in battle, the morale of the king's army was severely hit. But although Jess died, the king's army on the battlefield was in the melee. Many soldiers of the king's army didn't know that Jess had died in battle here. Fierce fighting is still going on. After all, the king's army is also large in number, plus it is an elite force, and it is still in the process of intense consumption with Rog and the others. Fierce fighting continued, and the king's officers and soldiers fell in groups. The originally flat area on top of the snow-capped mountain peaks has turned into a stream of blood. However, the blood was quickly frozen by the cold weather, covered with more snowflakes. Fierce fighting continued for about 3 hours. On the snowfield at the top of the busy central mountain, there are dead and wounded king's army everywhere. But they all fell to the ground. "Is it finally over?" Roger said, looking around. "It was a brutal battle," Sanji said. Without saying a word, Zoro put the 3 swords back into their scabbards. Luffy was lying on the snow and kept saying, "I'm so hungry." Dalton turned back into human form and looked around the messy battlefield. All of this, such a tragic battle. "It was all for Wapoli," Dalton said with infinite emotion. "I'm so tired, everyone, let's take a break. Then quickly collect shells and bombs. Destroy the golden gate of that mountain," Rog said. "Okay, now everyone is very tired, and no one objects." After a period of rest, everyone began to collect shells and bombs. The artillery shells and bombs on the battlefield were very scattered, and it took everyone several hours to collect them. After collecting enough shells and bombs, place about 40 or 50 boxes of explosives in front of the Golden Gate. "Okay, now we are going to destroy this Golden Gate," Rog said. Pirate Plant Fruit. Author, Lee A Dream. Chapter 108. After putting piles of explosives on each other, Rog and the others drove a distance of 100 meters. "Okay, now it's time to ignite these explosives," Roger said. In front of Rog, a cannon was aimed at the mountain of explosives in front of the Golden Gate. After a tug on the cannon's cord, a cannonball fired and hit the multitude of explosives in front of the Golden Gate. The detonated explosive set off a skyrocketing explosion, and the sky was torn apart by the violent explosion force. These violent explosive forces further expanded the existing cracks in the Golden Gate. The high temperature and huge impact blasted the Golden Gate into pieces. After the soaring explosion smoke dissipated, Rog looked towards the Golden Palace. "I saw that the gate of the Golden Palace had been blown into pieces." "Okay, it finally blew up," Sanji said happily. "Finally, we can go in and kill Wapol," Sauron said. "Once inside, it's time to accept Wapoli," Dalton said earnestly. "Then let's go in," Rog said. All 5 of them rushed towards the blasted Golden Gate with full concentration. When you get to the Golden Gate that was blown open, look inside. In addition to shattering the Golden Gate, the violent explosion just now destroyed some of the strengthened facilities inside. However, the interior of this Golden Palace is still quite huge. Although it was affected by the power of the explosion just now, it was already a mess. But it still looks very grand. "It's really wide enough," Sanji said. Wapoli built this golden palace out of his mobile phone wealth, thinking that his rule would last forever like gold, Dalton said as he walked. Rog looked here and said, I'm afraid there will be remnants of enemies in this palace. Let's kill them in one go. At the same time, it's best if someone continues to block the entrance of the palace. Otherwise, once Wapol escapes, we won't be able to kill him. You're right, we can't let the target escape. We can't give him this chance, Sanji said. Then who will guard this place? Zoro asked. Well, then Sauron. Can you come to guard? Rog said. Sauron looked at Rog and said, of course. Because your sword skills are astonishing, and you can observe the movements of any enemy. You are the one with the highest insight among all of us, Rog said. Thank you for the compliment, Zoro said. Sanji also looked at Zoro, and said, more importantly, Chlorella is always an idiot. So it's better to continue guarding here. Who is a road idiot? Zoro glared at Sanji fiercely. Dalton said, okay, everyone, stop arguing. Hurry up. I have a bad feeling. Rog, Dalton, Sanji and Luffy explored deeper into the Golden Palace together. The Golden Palace is really big, but Dalton has some experience and common sense about palaces. After all, Dalton was once an important minister of the former king of Drum Kingdom. Therefore, although this Golden Palace was built by Wapol after he left, he could still determine the layout of some of the main passages in the palace. Everyone came all the way to a huge hall. In this hall, there is a large group of fully armed royal guards wearing knight armor. And a middle-aged man with an exploding head in a cloak stood in front of the royal guards. You are still here. This man is also the Prime Minister of the Magnetic Drum Country, Crom-Ahriman, said to Rog and the others. Rog looked at Crom-Ahriman with an afro and said, where is Wapol? His Majesty Wapoli is not something you can see, Crom-Ahriman said. Dalton looked at Crom-Ahriman, staring at him firmly. Oh, Dalton, said Crom-Ahriman. Crom-Ahriman, let me tell you. Jess is dead. If you don't want to follow in his footsteps, don't stop us. Tell us the real whereabouts of Wapoli, Dalton said calmly. Dalton once served Valpole and the previous king together with Crom-Ahriman and Jess. But Dalton left Wapoli and became the leader of the resistance because he was dissatisfied with Wapoli's brutality. Crom-Ahriman was surprised when he heard that Jess had died. What, Jace is dead, Crom-Ahriman said. He's dead, but we didn't bring his body. If you don't want to stop us, you can go outside and look for his body, Dalton said. Crom-Ahriman immediately came back to his senses and said, he is just dead. But I will not let you succeed. I will continue to protect His Majesty Wapol. Guys who are obsessed with obsession, let's have a showdown, Dalton said. Crom-Ahriman glared at Dalton fiercely. Okay, Crom-Ahriman said. No, I will fight you one-on-one, Dalton said. Crom-Ahriman said, no problem. Crom-Ahriman quickly picked up the two black axes on his waist. Holding an axe in both hands, although Crom-Ahriman is a civil servant, he can still fight. Dalton walked up to Rog and the others alone, brandishing the iron halberd with both hands and aiming at the enemy. Come on, Dalton said. Dalton and Crom-Ahriman rushed together. The iron halberd in Dalton's hand hit Crom-Ahriman with a tremendous force. Crom-Ahriman crosses his axes to block. There was a loud bang, metal and iron clanging, and sparks flying everywhere. Crom-Ahriman still lost to Dalton's huge strength, and his whole body was shaken several meters away. Yet Dalton brandished his iron halberd and stabbed Crom-Ahriman. Crom-Ahriman wields twin axes very flexibly in battle. Sanji and others, who were watching the battle from the sidelines, had to admit that the two axes in Crom-Ahriman's hands could really be used flexibly. Coupled with Crom-Ahriman's physical agility, his fighting style allows him to wield two axes like soaring birds. For a while, Dalton and Crom-Ahriman, who had the upper hand in power, were evenly matched. But Dalton is a warrior after all, and during the battle, Chromaman's physical strength was far less durable than Dalton's. "I don't want to waste time with you." Dalton's body changes, from a human form to a human beast form. Dalton, who looks like a Tauren, wields an iron halberd like a violent warrior. Chromaman quickly retreated. In this state, Dalton's strength and speed have increased several times. Chromaman's twin axes were handed over to Dalton's iron halberd. A sound resounded through the hall of the palace for a while, and Chromaman's double axes were all bounced off. Chromaman rolled over 10 meters backwards. Chromaman stood up again after being hit hard. "Damn it, it seems that I still need my unique skills," Chromaman said. The man with the explosive head suddenly grew several spherical, thorny black objects on his body. Chromaman threw it at Dalton. Dalton couldn't dodge in time, and was stuck to his body by these thorny black objects. Dalton's face became ugly. He once sparred with Chromaman in combat skills. Dalton was well aware of the hazards of these objects. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Pirate Plant Fruit. Author, Lee A Dream. Chapter 109. A black, spiky object stuck to Dalton's body. On the legs, arms, chest and abdomen, there are a total of 6 thorny objects stuck to the body. "Hey, Dalton. You should be very aware of the power of these objects," Chromaman said proudly. Dalton's face was serious, and his body became extremely cautious. He knew very well that these thorny black objects posed an extremely serious threat. Chromaman swung his 2 axes and struck Dalton. Dalton quickly dodged the attack at a critical moment, and Chromaman slashed into the air. However, Dalton's body suddenly burst into a sizzling electric discharge. Then a burst of lightning surrounded Dalton's burly body, shocking him severely. "Ah!" Dalton screamed and squatted down. Everyone present was shocked. "How could this happen?" Sanji said in surprise. "To be hit by electricity. It's like being struck by lightning," Zoro said in shock. "Wow, it's generating electricity," Luffy said in surprise. "It's like this. Could it be that those objects can generate electricity?" Rog said quietly. Dalton gritted his teeth and stood up again. "Chromaman can attack with this special black fiber. Once it is stuck, it can generate amazing electricity," Dalton said. Chromaman looked towards Dalton with a proud look on his face. "Indeed, my electrostatic fiber can generate amazing electricity. If it is ordinary, it can just suck up some paper scraps. But once my electrostatic fiber is stuck to the body, it will generate amazing electricity, enough to electrocute an elephant," Chromaman said. Chromaman swung the twin axes again, and threw both axes at Dalton with great force. 2 axes flew over spinning. Dalton quickly ducked aside. Both axes hit the ground. But Dalton's body was shocked for a while. "Ah!" Dalton rolled to the ground in pain. The 2 axes flew back into Chromaman's hands like boomerangs. "If you can't dodge the axe, you'll have to withstand an electric shock comparable to thunder and lightning," Chromaman said. Chromaman's electrostatic fibers can generate static electricity as long as the stuck object moves, but the scale of static electricity is tens of thousands of times that of ordinary static electricity. After Dalton turned into a Tauren in human beast form, he couldn't bear the static electricity generated. Not to mention the others. Rog looked at Luffy. "But this rubber man is not afraid of electricity. But the opponent is going to have a duel with Dalton." Dalton stood up again and looked at Chromaman fiercely. This man was filled with anger. "I won't dodge anymore, then I'll let you taste my true anger." Dalton's body changed again, and his original human beast form changed again. Dalton landed on all fours, like a yak. Immediately afterwards, Dalton's body became even bigger. The head is also transformed into a real bull's head. Two majestic and powerful horns point forward. Of course, those static fibers didn't fall down. And because of the changes in Dalton's violent situation, an astonishing electric shock was produced. Rog, Sanji, Zoro, and Luffy all looked at Dalton, who had endured the powerful electric shock, in surprise. Dalton's body changes into a black yak. A black yak with a length of more than 4 meters is now like an ancient giant beast full of murderous aura. Why, how is it possible that he could bear these electric shocks forcefully? Chromaman said in shock. Dalton's body began to sprint violently. Let us find out, Chromaman. Dalton, who had turned into a black yak, roared loudly. Chromaramon fled quickly. Dalton was hot on his heels, and now Dalton was covered in electric discharges. The whole thing looks like a flashing yak. It's so terrible. The guards of the king's army who were watching from the side were also shocked. Dalton is like an electric beast. Rog and Sanji also had to admit that Dalton was now like a creature that transcended natural common sense. Dalton is now running wild. In order to chase Chromaramon, they rushed towards the hundreds of elite royal guards wearing Wapol alloy armor in the hall. Chromaramon was already desperate to escape. Dalton, who was like an electric bull, rushed into the king's army. What? Crap. I'm going to be electrocuted. I don't want to die. Everyone run away quickly. The Wapol alloy armor worn by these royal guards has no insulation ability, but it makes the powerful static electricity generated by Dalton even more terrifying and powerful. These elite guards of Wapol who guard the Golden Palace are powerful fighters who are not afraid of death. However, being intimidated by Dalton's godlike aura and power, he was unable to fight back effectively. It was even said that they were scared out of their wits. The elite guards of hundreds of people were all crushed by Dalton's violent impact. It's really scary. Sanji also took a breath and said. But it's easy to deal with them, Sauron said. Is this Dalton's desperate charge? People who can reach this level need to be extremely determined in their hearts. Even if they are to be cut into pieces by 1,000 knives, they will not hesitate to do it. But the driving force for all this is actually the justice in the heart and a sense of responsibility for others. Rog sighed. Dalton's courage is based on his long-standing hatred for Wapoli and his servants, and his pity for the people of the Drum Country. Chromaраmon's whole body was already frightened and insane. Eventually he bumped into the throne in the hall. Dalton rushed over and crashed into Chromaраmon's body like an electric bull. 2 horns pierced Chromaраmon's abdomen. The electricity mixed with Dalton's whole body shocked Chromaраmon's entire body, revealing his skeleton. Even the throne made of gold was shattered by a huge force. Dalton finally stopped. The body of Chromaman who was hit was thrown violently by him and flew into the air from the horns. In the end, the body of Chromaramon, who was electrocuted into coke, fell heavily to the floor of this hall. It really stinks. Luffy suddenly pinched his nose. Chromaраmon's corpse emitted countless burnt smells. Dalton, who killed Chromaramon, stopped, and the electricity also disappeared. The man reverted from a yak to a human animal form with Tauren appearance. Roger and the 4 of them rushed to check on Dalton. Dalton, are you okay? Roger asked. Sanji glanced at Dalton, and said, how can there be nothing wrong with the injury so badly? He really managed to hold on, Sauron also said with a complex and affectionate face. Rog looked at Dalton and saw that the static fibers on his body were still there. Luffy, help Dalton get these things down, Roger said to Luffy. No problem, Luffy said. Luffy is an insulating body, so he successfully helped Dalton get rid of all 6 electrostatic fibers on his body. Pirate Plant Fruit. Author, Lee A Dream. Chapter 110. After successfully removing the electrostatic fiber, Dalton was finally able to move freely. However, after the kind of battle that he had just endured, Dalton's body had become scarred. Dalton, Can you still speak? Roger asked. Dalton's scorched face moved vigorously. Dalton looked at Roger, Luffy and Sanji. Just now I killed Cromaramon, Dalton said heavily. Dalton also looked at Cromaramon's charred corpse on the floor of the hall. You fought so bravely just now, Rog said to Dalton. Okay, then we should continue to act. But Dalton, you'd better go to heal. After all, this is the top of the mountain. There is no way to go down to find Gullivaw's doctor and the reindeer who can heal. But since this is the palace of Wapol, we can find some medicine, Sanji said. Dalton looked around and said, yes, let's find some medicine. Rog helped Dalton up and said, Dalton, let's find medicine together. Your body must be healed. Rog, Sanji, Dalton, and Luffy began to search for the medical room in the palace where medicine was stored. Dalton was able to judge the structure of the palace and the approximate location of some important rooms. The four of them arrived at a medical room in the palace. In this medical room, the four found some boxes of trauma medicine and some oral antibiotics. Both Rog and Sanji know some nutritious medicines for the human body and some medical common sense. Dalton fights for a long time and is also good at some medical treatment. Soon, he took antibiotics, applied medicine to the wound on his body and wrapped it with a bandage. Dalton sat up on the bed and took a little rest. I feel better, let's keep moving, Dalton said. Rog looked at Dalton and said, are you okay? Well then. But the place where we fought just now was the hall with the throne, but Wapoli was not there. Is there any mechanism here? The agency secretly said, that's not true. But what I'm most worried about is that Wapoli may have gone to the arsenal where the ammunition is stored in this golden palace, Dalton said. Arsenal, Sanji asked. Yes, this is also what I am most worried about. There is a huge arsenal in this golden palace. Wapol is a person with the ability to swallow fruits. He can swallow anything. Even those arms. Once it is swallowed, then we will face a mobile arsenal, Dalton said with a serious face. After hearing this, both Rog and Sanji's expressions became a little grim. Luffy, who was still innocent, looked confused. Then we need to pay more attention, Rog said. But let's go, Sanji said. Dalton got up from the bed. The four left the medical room and began to search for the arsenal. After searching for a while, everyone came to a wide hall filled with dining tables and cutlery. This hall is not as solemn and grand as the previous Hall of the Throne. But it is full of enjoyable style, with exquisite silk carpets covering the hall. Dining tables, tableware, and some refrigerators are placed on one side of the hall, as well as some exquisite enamel stoves and various cooking utensils for roasting, stewing, boiling, and frying. Seeing this, Sanji's eyes lit up immediately. It's a fine dining room. He's really rich, and these are excellent cutlery and cooking utensils. Sanji said as he walked to a huge rectangular dining table in the center. Beside this dining table, there are more than 10 chairs. The dining table is covered with all kinds of exquisite tableware. This is exquisite silver tableware produced by the Kingdom of Ulkron. He even bought it. This model is still a limited edition, so he must have spent a lot of money. Sanji grabbed a silver plate with exquisite patterns, exclaimed in shock. Sanji picked up a golden rice bowl from the dining table again, and said, this is also tableware produced by the Kingdom of Ulkron. The Kingdom of Ulkron is a kingdom well known in the North Sea for producing expensive tableware and works of art. Wapol really no expense spared. Then he is quite a nouveau riche, Rog said as he picked up a pair of silver knives and forks from the dining table. No matter how vulgar Wapoli himself is. But the tableware produced by the Kingdom of Ulkron is a world-class treasure. He really put a lot of effort into eating, Sanji said seriously. Sanji continued to inspect the tableware as if he had discovered a rare treasure. Rog looked at the cooking utensils in the restaurant again. It's really expensive cooking utensils. A golden pot, a fine marble stove. A shovel made of silver, Rog said when he saw these cooking utensils. Dalton also came over and said, "These cooking utensils, no matter how expensive they are all obtained through exploitation by Walpole." Then Dalton sighed. "The valuable cooking utensils in front of us, as well as the tableware before them, are a huge wealth acquired by Walpole through unscrupulous means. It is a manifestation of Walpole's greed that he spends so much effort on eating. Feed a lot of delicious food." Suddenly Luffy's voice came. Roger and Dalton looked in Luffy's direction. I saw Luffy opened a huge refrigerator, took out more than a dozen fat roasted chicken legs from it, and started to eat it. "Hey, don't you guys want some?" Luffy said with his mouth full of food. "In this way, everyone must have been hungry in the previous battle," Rog said. "Then let's eat some too." Dalton and Roger looked at each other and said. Roger also walked to a refrigerator and opened it. The refrigerator was stocked with bread, bacon, roast turkey, cake, condensed milk, butter, jam, and red wine. Roger took it out and brought it to the previous rectangular dining table, and began to enjoy it. "The long-term battle before was already in the dark, and now I feel hungry when I relax." Roger first ate a piece of bacon, and started drinking red wine. After carefully crafted bacon, drink red wine. This feeling is really refreshing. "It's been a long time since I ate cake." Roger stuffed a piece of cake into his mouth and chewed. There are also lots of candied raisins in the cake. When tasting these foods, Rog really felt that Walpole was really a person who was very good at enjoying himself. Although it is some cold food taken out of the refrigerator, it can still make people feel that it has been cooked very carefully. After eating 5 pieces of bacon and 4 pieces of cake in one sitting, Roger started eating a huge roast turkey again. Dalton also took bread and meat from a refrigerator and ate at the table. This man was already extremely exhausted after fighting like an ox before. Luffy ransacked the food directly from the refrigerator. Sanji smoked gracefully and walked to Roger's side. "Sanji, don't you eat something?" Rog asked. "No, a gentleman should eat gracefully. And I'm a chef, since you eat. Then I will make it more comfortable for you to eat," Sanji said. Without saying a word, Sanji quickly rushed to the cooking utensils without continuing to talk to Rog. Sanji quickly lit a fire on the stove and started cooking. Roger looked at Sanji from time to time. The man cooked the food he found with his hands gracefully. Pirate Plant Fruit. Author, Lee A Dream. Chapter 111. Holding a golden kitchen knife in both hands, Sanji cut a thick frozen beef leg with great precision. When cutting the beef leg, you need to chop the shredded meat with a knife and avoid the bone. "Cut the beef from the beef leg perfectly," Sanji said while skillfully cutting the beef leg meat. A half-person high thick beef leg was cut into dozens of strips of bull's head by Sanji with a golden kitchen knife. Put the beef cubes on a large plate aside. Sanji threw away the clean beef leg bones that had been cut up for no use. Another 7 cabbages were placed on the oak chopping board. Sanji waved the golden kitchen knife in his hand like a whirlwind, and all the cabbages turned into a pile of intact leaves. After cutting the cabbage, Sanji brought over a dozen more oranges. To cut an orange is to cut the oranges into pieces. Sanji did not use a gold kitchen knife this time, but replaced it with a silver fruit knife. The silver fruit knife in his hand ran across the orange peel like running water. Oranges are each suddenly divided into 6 petals. Nearly 100 orange petals were cut and placed together with the previous cabbage into a huge wrist made of glass. The salad is ready, next is cooking the beef. Sanji strung together the previously cut beef with 10 iron skewers, and then gracefully sprinkled butter with a glass jar full of butter. Then season with salt and spices. Start the golden roast beef. Sanji grilled the beef on the fire of the marble stove. The fire roasted the beef covered with butter until it was charred on the outside and tender on the inside. At the same time, Sanji quickly filled a golden pot with prawns as big as his palm. After pouring water into it, putting salt and spices, seasonings, and all vegetables, it is stewed on another stove. After baking and stewing for a while, these two main dishes are ready. I still need a finale. Sanji quickly put a glass jar the size of a bucket into place, and piled up all kinds of red wine, beer, white wine, sake, fruit juice, milk, special drinks. Start making cocktails. Sanji uncorked so many alcoholic beverages and drinks. Pour in different amounts of various drinks according to Sanji's experience and density of various drinks. Lalo whiskey, slok wine, tequila, cheese liqueur, sauce-flavored liquor, misty sake, apple juice, milk, and coffee wapoli. The ingredients here are really rich, Sanji said while preparing. Sanji has a reasonable grasp of the proportions of various drinks, he is very clear about how much to pour, and what should not be put. After some preparation, a large jar of special cocktails was prepared. Sanji put the grilled beef on a plate, and picked up the prawns in the golden pot. Also pick up the salad bowl. The prepared two dishes, one salad and one drink, were brought to the largest rectangular dining table. Roger, Dalton, and Luffy looked at Sanji in surprise. Golden roast beef, stewed prawns, vegetable and fruit salad, all ingredient cocktail. Enjoy it. Because we are in the enemy's castle after all, we can't make more. These should be enough, Sanji ordered again, Jinyan said leisurely. Rog looked at these delicacies, and quickly said, Sanji, it's really hard work for you. I'm not welcome. Your cooking skills are amazing, Dalton said with a look of surprise. Although Dalton was considered a rough man, he was very moved when he saw the carefully prepared dishes in front of him. Wow, this is my favorite, Luffy said happily. His rubber hands quickly took two roasted golden beef cubes and ate them. Sanji also found a seat and sat down, eating leisurely on a gold plate with a silver knife and fork. Roger stuck a piece of golden roast beef with a fork. This piece of roast beef is the size of a palm, and the butter on the outside is roasted golden under the fire. The rich aroma of meat enters the nose first, making people feel extremely delicious. Take a bite. Roger took a bite and just took a bite. The rich, smooth, and tender beef makes my mouth feel extremely comfortable. The golden roast beef is really delicious and well deserved, Rog praised. The psychological satiety of eating golden roast beef far exceeds the actual taste. Eating just a small amount can be incredibly comforting. This is a delicacy that satisfies the taste and nourishes the stomach. Rog quickly ate up the golden roast beef. Ah, it's great that you like that. And you're not too hasty to eat? Like that guy, he's just as hungry as crazy. Just you, Luffy, Sanji said. At the same time, he blocked Luffy, who was eating too fast with a fork. Sanji is a super chef. For him, people like Luffy who eat too much don't respect food, and people who taste too small can't show the deliciousness of food. And people like Roger who eat at a moderate speed and praise the food make him the happiest. Dalton ate the stewed prawns in the golden pot. These stewed food tasted fragrant and had a special flavor. Your stewed prawns are really delicious. I have never eaten such delicious food, Dalton praised as he put a prawn into his mouth with a fork. Sanji puffed out the smoke ring and said, I made this very simply. I just paid attention to the number and types of spices. But the ingredients and spices here are very good, and it makes me cook very well. Easy. Sanji drank the cocktail elegantly while using a knife and fork to cut the golden roast beef and a piece of cheese on the plate. Although Sanji didn't cook a lot, he had eaten some cold food before. So the four of them all felt very full after eating Sanji's food soon. And Luffy stretched into a ball. Phew, I'm full. But we still need to get on with our business later, Roger said after taking a sip of the 10,000 ingredients cocktail. After entering this Wanji cocktail, I feel both sweet and bitter, but it is sour but not too sour, sweet but not too sweet, bitter but makes up for the taste, spicy but perfectly embellished, fresh and thick. It can be said that each flavor is just right. This is the secret of Sanji's cocktail making. All the drinks are perfectly prepared according to the best ratio. Dalton also drank a lot of Sanji's 10,000 ingredients cocktail, This guy likes alcohol very much. Although he likes to drink strong alcohol, after being seriously injured before, it is also good to have some special cocktails like this. Sanji, your cooking skills are really good. If we defeat Wapol, please help us hold a banquet to celebrate with everyone. Is that okay? Dalton asked politely. Of course, as long as you provide enough raw materials, Sanji said. Dalton looked a little happy. He really hoped that his subordinates and more people could taste Sanji's delicious cooking. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Pirate Plant Fruit. Author, Lee A Dream. Chapter 112. Okay, everyone can prepare to move forward, Rog said. Of course it's fine, Sanji said after finishing his meal, lighting another cigarette. Let's do it, Dalton said. Luffy was still eating a lot of food and said, are you leaving? I just felt 70% full. Okay, if you really eat so much, it's not good for fighting, Rog said to Luffy. 4 people left the huge restaurant one after another. After leaving here, everyone continued to search. Finally, we arrived at a passage deep in the Golden Palace. Does this passage really lead to the arsenal? Sanji asked. Dalton was silent for a moment, and said, according to my speculation about the layout of the palace, it should be right here. The 4 continued along this passage, and finally arrived in front of a huge metal door. This huge metal door has the words arsenal written on it. It is indeed here, yes, Dalton said. After observing the door for a long time, Rog said to the others, okay, let's go in together. Rog took the lead, and the 4 entered the arsenal together. However, when Rog pushed the door, he found that the door was actually opened and opened as soon as he pushed it. The 4 entered the arsenal. There is a huge chandelier on the top of the arsenal to illuminate the entire arsenal. Of course, there is still no light that can shine in some hidden corners. There are so many items here. There are so many weapons and ammunition, Sanji said after observing the surroundings. Everyone, be careful, there are a lot of explosives here, Dalton said. There are some explosives and weapons here, which will be very terrifying if they are detonated. It's really strange, is he here? Rog said strangely. Wapoli is not yet visible in this arsenal. Roger continued to observe his surroundings, but suddenly he felt uneasy for a while. This feeling is that terrible feeling of silence in the dark. It was a powerful killing machine that was eyeing him. He's definitely here, I can feel it, Dalton said. It's really strong. Is this Wapol's murderous intention? Rog said. The feeling of a powerful enemy is a fighting instinct, whether it is Rog, Dalton, Sanji, or Luffy. It seems to be coming in that direction, Roger said. The 4 looked at each other, and walked into the depths on the right side of the arsenal together. The 4 acted very cautiously. This murderous aura is very strong, enough to kill all the same murderous aura. After continuing for more than 20 meters, it was already very dark ahead. I feel it, Sanji said. This always elegant and calm man was also sweating. What is this? Luffy said suddenly. On the ground, there was only a group of blood and pieces of flesh. Moving forward for a few meters, it can be said that blood and flesh are flying everywhere. Is this all Wapol's doing? Rog asked. Dalton looked at the flesh and blood and said, it's strange. Wapol will devour his opponent when he wants to punish him. These flesh and blood are obviously not bitten by teeth. They are caused by being attacked by some kind of sharp weapon or gun. Rog moved his gaze from the flesh and blood on the ground to the front. A huge figure loomed in the darkness ahead. Suddenly, a pair of eyes flashed with a murderous light. The eyes are huge, comparable to those of dinosaurs. It is full of the breath of ancient beasts, as if a cruel king is examining his opponent. This huge figure began to move, and was gradually illuminated by lights. Seeing this figure appear, the four of Rog were stunned. I saw a huge body with a height of 10 meters and a whole body of steel walking out. This body looks like a Tyrannosaurus, but it is made of steel. But that head is a human head. The head resembled a half man, half hippopotamus. Still all steel. Those huge mouths are big enough to eat a cow in one bite, and those eyes are bloodshot and extremely terrifying. Oh, Dalton. You and the pirates are here. The monster let out a creepy growl. Wapole, you have turned into this, Dalton said in shock. Wapole is now the same as an iron Tyrannosaurus. Both the body, the legs and the two claws are as sharp as steel. Also has a huge body and tail. To everyone, the huge arsenal was almost like an ordinary room in front of Wapole. What is even more shocking is that there are two huge barrels on the back of the steel Tyrannosaurus. And above the barrel is still a 7-round cannon. Dalton looked at Wapole, who had become exaggeratedly huge. Wapole, could it be said that you became like this after eating the weapons in this arsenal? Dalton asked. Wapole looked at everything in the arsenal with huge eyes. Yes, I am a person with the ability to swallow fruits. All the weapons I like in this arsenal have been swallowed by me, Wapole said. Rog also looked around. It is true that although there are many weapons left in the arsenal, they are obviously messed up. Someone was obviously causing a scene here. Among the remaining weapons, there are many cannons, machine guns, and special weapons, but Wapole didn't like them. So you can imagine how terrifying the weapon Wapole swallowed was. In addition to the two huge 7-round cannons on the back of the steel Tyrannosaurus, it is unknown how many other weapons are hidden in his body. This is the effect of swallowing fruit, Sanji said. Yes, Wapole is a person with the ability to devour fruits. He can transform the swallowed weapons and objects into parts of his body. Now it is obvious that he has swallowed a lot of weapons and steel. That's why he has become like this, Dalton said. What a scary guy, Sanji said. Wapole looked at Rog and Dalton, as well as Sanji and Luffy, and roared, I just swallowed enough weapons and killed the minister who was shaken by his loyalty with the weapons of my body. You also see to these humble flesh and blood. If you resist His Majesty Wapole, this is the end. You will die without a whole body. After the roar was over, Wapole laughed even more ferociously. The sound of his wild laughter kept echoing in this arsenal. Rog looked at the ammunition in the arsenal. Dalton, I have an idea. But we need to get out quickly, Roger said in a low voice. Really, then let's get out of here quickly, Dalton said. Sanji and Luffy also knew it, and the four of them moved slowly towards the rear. Pirate Plant Fruit. Author, Lee A Dream. Chapter 113. The movement of the four of Rog was seen by Wapole. Don't even think about leaving. Wapole turned his body, and his huge steel tail swept towards the four Rogs. Beware. Rog quickly evaded. Sanji, Dalton, and Luffy also successfully dodged the attack. After dodging the attack, the four of them hurried towards the gate of the arsenal. I will tear you apart, Wapole chased the four men fiercely. Wapole, who had transformed into a steel Tyrannosaurus, ran wildly in the arms warehouse with two huge legs. Many remaining bombs and weapons in the arsenal were knocked away, and the sound of metal collisions was heard all over the arsenal. In the process of fleeing to the arsenal, Rog took the opportunity to take a big bomb half the height of a person. The bomb had an oval shape and a tail fin. It has the words "Made by Lexus" on it. Everyone, hurry up, Rog said as he picked up the bomb. Sanji, Dalton, and Luffy escaped from the gate of the arsenal one after another. Roger rushed to the gate of the arsenal and looked back. I saw that the frighteningly big Wapole had already chased very close. Give it to you, rest in peace here. Rog opened the bomb message, and then threw it at a weapon bomb pile in the arsenal. Then Roger turned around and rushed out of the gate desperately. Wapole, who was still in the arsenal, looked at the bomb with his fierce giant eyes. The defused bomb rolled into a mass of bombs and weapons. The bomb flashed and the fire spread quickly. Outside the arsenal, the four of Rog rushed tens of meters quickly. At this time, only an astonishing explosion was heard behind him. "It's absolutely earth-shaking," Dalton said in shock. The passageway where everyone was located also shook as if it had been shaken by an earthquake. At the same time, I felt a powerful heat wave hit from behind. The four of them took advantage of their last strength and finally rushed out of this passage. After the four people rushed out of the passage, a shocking burst of explosive air rushed out of the passage. What? The four Rogs were swept dozens of meters away by the air wave. When the sound of the explosion disappeared, Rog stood up from the ground again. Looking back, I saw that the passage leading to the arsenal was already full of smoke. "What a horrible explosion, almost killed me," Sanji said with lingering fear. Luffy looked disgraced, but after putting on his straw hat again, he jumped up and said, "Wow, what an interesting explosion." Dalton looked towards the passage, which was so badly damaged that no one could have survived the situation. Rog looked at the passage that was still filled with thick smoke and said, "Have you killed him?" However, both Rog and Dalton had a feeling in their hearts that Wapoli was not dead. There was still thick smoke billowing in the passage, but a looming huge figure seemed to be shaking, followed by a pair of murderous eyes flickering. Roger and Dalton looked at each other. Sure enough, he survived. There was a piercing metallic sound in the passage, as if a giant made of metal was moving. Finally, Wapol, who was like the Iron Tyrannosaurus, rushed out. "What a powerful explosion!" roared Wapol. Wapol, who was like a steel Tyrannosaurus, took a step forward and completely walked out of the passage. Here is a larger hall. Here the four of Rog can see Wapol's Iron Tyrannosaurus-like body more clearly. Wapol's whole body is made of black steel, and a black steel Tyrannosaurus wagging its tail and walking in this hall with two terrifyingly large 7-shot revolvers on its back. "What a terrifying steel monster," Sanji said, blowing out a smoke ring. "Are we just going to fight him?" Luffy asked. "How can we defeat him? Even the strong explosion just now couldn't kill him," Dalton said. Rog looked at Wapoli and said, "In any case, there is only one battle left. Now I am Wapol the Iron Tyrannosaurus." Wapol, who had the body of a steel Tyrannosaurus, roared. The entire palace was reverberated by this terrifying metal friction-like roar. "This is the perfect place to use my weapon." The Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapol opened his mouth and aimed at the four of Rog. Immediately, a beam of flame as thick as a bucket shot out. Intense flames spread quickly, enveloping the four of Rog. The four of Rog fled desperately and left the hall quickly. "This guy can actually breathe fire," Sanji said while running. "Wow, he can actually breathe fire. How scary," Luffy said while running wildly. "Dalton's body has turned into a yak." "Come up here," Dalton said. Roger, Luffy, and Sanji jumped on Dalton's back. Rog looked back, and the hall had already been turned into a sea of flames. And the Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapol was covered in flames all over his body, spitting out flames and rushing towards him. "I will burn you all to ashes," Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapol roared. Sanji looked back at the Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapol. "What a hellish scene, a flaming steel Tyrannosaurus," Sanji said with emotion. Dalton's speed after turning into a yak was still astonishing, and he quickly rushed to the hall where the throne was before. Then the route back outside the palace is going to be more familiar. After a while of flames, the Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapol chased after him. Rog saw in horror that everything around here was devoured by flames in a very short period of time. Many items were directly burnt, and even the gold items here were melted. "Once this flame is burned, you will definitely die," Rog said. It would be a fierce battle against the Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapol, and this Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapol has both offensive and defensive capabilities. The weapons and fighting methods that are not in hand are just chilling. Don't try to run away, let you have a taste of this. The iron Tyrannosaurus Wapol closed his mouth, and pointed the two 7-round cannons on his back at Dalton and Rog. For example, the flames shot from his mouth are limited to only 30 meters, but these two huge 7-shot rotating machine guns are different. They are the trump card of ranged attacks. Each 7-shot revolver is a huge muzzle with a diameter of 1 meter, but there are 7 sub-muzzles on it. This is simply a super large machine gun, but the difference is that ordinary machine guns fire bullets, but this 7-round revolver shoots shells. 7-shot revolver, fire. The two huge 7-shot revolver guns on the back of the iron Tyrannosaurus Wapol fired a salvo. The continuous sound of machine guns sounded. Each 7-round revolver fired 2 waves of shells. Each wave contains 7 30-centimeter diameter cannonballs, and a total of 20 cannonballs were fired at Dalton and Rog. Put this rack. Pirate Plant Fruit. Author, Lee A Dream. Chapter 114. 28 shells were fired at Rog and Dalton. Rog patted Luffy and said, "It's up to you." Rubber dot balloon. Luffy breathed in the gas suddenly and turned into a balloon. More than a dozen shells hit Luffy's body, and Luffy bounced them off. However, more than a dozen shells were not stopped, and Rog threw out a rattan whip. The rattan whip quickly grew into a huge net. Successfully blocked and detonated more than a dozen other shells. However, under the violent explosive force, the rattan whip was completely destroyed. After resisting this wave of attacks, Dalton quickly rushed out of the hall with the 3 of them. Afterwards, after running all the way, the 4 of them finally arrived at the gate of the palace. Rog looked forward, and Sauron was sitting in the center of the gate. "Zoro!" Luffy shouted. Sauron stood up and looked at Dalton, who had turned into a black yak, and Rog on his back. "What happened to you? Did you destroy Wapol?" Sauron asked. "No, look at the back," Rog said. Sauron saw only Dalton and the others approaching the gate, and behind them was a steel Tyrannosaurus chasing. "What is this?" Zoro said in shock. Zoro was also extremely shocked when he saw this monster. A black 10-meter-tall steel Tyrannosaurus was chasing Dalton and Roger. Dalton had already rushed to Zoro's side. "Get on my back," Dalton said. Sauron also jumped onto Dalton's back. Sitting on Dalton's back, Sauron looked back at the steel Tyrannosaurus behind him. "What the hell is going on?" Zoro asked. "This is Wapol," Roger said. "What?" Zoro said in surprise. "Well, Wapol has the ability to swallow fruit. He swallowed a lot of weapons and ammunition, turning him into the steel Tyrannosaurus Wapol," Rog said. Sauron looked at the behemoth that was chasing after him, and felt an unprecedented pressure. Dalton took the 4 of them out of the gate of the Golden Palace to the snowfield at the top of the mountain. The iron Tyrannosaurus Wapol also rushed out. The snowfield outside was still covered with heavy snow, but the corpses and wreckage of thousands of royal soldiers who had fought fiercely before were still scattered all over the snowfield. There are still many that have not been buried by heavy snow. After the iron Tyrannosaurus Wapol rushed out, he looked at the snowfield. "My army is destroyed like this," the steel Tyrannosaurus Wapol said with emotion. But it's not surprising, because the reason why Rog and Dalton were able to go deep into the Golden Palace in the previous battle must be the defeat of the elite king's army outside. But seeing the elite troops he had built up with years of hard work being annihilated, the steel Tyrannosaurus Wapol was also filled with sadness. These elite king's troops were formed by Wapol with an astonishing amount of money and effort. Various bounty hunters, killers, pirates, and mercenaries from the Grand Route and the Four Seas were all incorporated into his elite troops. All these armies were wiped out. "It's nothing, as long as I'm still here, those who dare to resist me will still die," said the steel Tyrannosaurus Wapol. The steel Tyrannosaurus Wapol once again aimed his attention at Rog and Dalton. Roger and Dalton have stopped fleeing now, and the 5 of them are standing on the snow. "Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapol," let's have a decisive battle, Dalton said loudly. Steel Tyrannosaurus Wapole, your death is coming soon, Rog said loudly. Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapole, let's have a fight, Sanji said loudly. Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapole, I'm going to blow you away, Luffy said loudly. Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapole, now is the time to decide the outcome, Sauron said loudly. The 5 people worked together, and the loud shouts shook the top of the mountain. The Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapole looked at the 5 of them. This huge monster was full of murderous aura. I will burn you all into ashes, roared the Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapole. The Steel Tyrannosaurus Wapole opened his mouth again. The flame of Wapole. A flame beam more than 20 meters long shot out from the mouth of the Steel Tyrannosaurus Wapole. The mighty flames burned the snow in front of them into steam, and even the ground at the top of the mountain was scorched black. At the same time, the Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapole took a big step and began to charge. The Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapole charged forward vigorously, using high-temperature flames to fly ashes to everything in front of him. Be careful and dodge, these flames can even melt steel and metal, Rog said. The 5 quickly escaped. The charge of the Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapole is still very fierce, especially the straight charge makes people feel like the Balrog of hell. The Steel Tyrannosaurus Wapole charged frantically, and when the 5 of them were evading, half of the snowfield on the top of the mountain had been melted. Many corpses and weapon wreckage of the king's army who died in battle were also turned into fly ash. When the 5 of them dealt with the Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapole, they also counterattacked to a certain extent. A frontal charge was too dangerous, so the 5 attacked from behind and from the side. Rog rushed to the back of the Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapole. Observing the behemoth at his feet, he saw that his whole body was made of black steel, making it difficult to attack him. Is there really nothing you can do? Rog looked at the black metal on the opponent's body. Sanji also jumped onto the back of the behemoth. Hey, Rog. Have you really not found a way? Sanji said. Sanji also kicked the back of the huge monster with his foot. The opponent's defense is extremely high, it is simply impossible to attack. Roger, don't you feel it's a little hot here? Sanji said suddenly. It's a little hot. Upon hearing what Sanji said, Rog also felt that the body of the Steel Tyrannosaurus Wapole was very hot. And the opponent's body is constantly heating up. The Steel Tyrannosaurus Wapole had experienced many explosions before, and his body temperature increased significantly when spitting out flames. It can be said that the use of high-temperature flames by the Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapole is not without cost. His body needs to withstand a very high temperature, but this is also within his tolerance range. But the Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapole has a bad temper, so he is obviously fighting out of control now. Thinking of this, Rog had an idea in his mind. Sanji, I have an idea, Roger said. What's going on? Sanji asked. We can guide the Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapole to the bottom of the mountain, Rog said. Then Rog quickly jumped to the head of the Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapole. Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapole also realized that Rog was on his head. Humble pirate, what are you going to do? Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapole roared. Rog clenched his fist, aimed at Wapole's huge eyes and hit him. Ow! The Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapole let out an earth-shattering roar. Rog punched the Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapole's eyes one after another. After a period of violent punches, the behemoth shook painfully and began to run wildly without direction. Rog looked towards the edge of the cliff at the top of the mountain that was getting closer, and kept attacking with his fists, causing the Steel Tyrannosaurus Wapole to reach the edge of the top of the mountain unintentionally. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Pirate Plant Fruit. Author, Lee A Dream. Chapter 115. The Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapole lost control of Rog's attack on its eyes. This behemoth finally rushed to the edge of the top of the mountain. "Asshole, get down here," the steel Tyrannosaurus Wapol roared angrily. Rog has been attacking the head of the iron Tyrannosaurus Wapol. All of a sudden, this huge monster stepped on the air, and its huge body also fell to the bottom of the mountain. "Go!" Rog suddenly jumped away from the body of the steel Tyrannosaurus Wapol. After Rog jumped away, the body of steel Tyrannosaurus Wapol began to become smaller and smaller in the field of vision. The five Rog looked at the steel Tyrannosaurus Wapol, who kept falling. In the end, the behemoth fell heavily to the bottom of Duomi, stirring up surprisingly high levels of white snow. "How many meters away? If you fall from this height, your body will be shattered," Sanji looked down and said. "I hope so," Zoro looked down and said. Dalton looked down the mountain and said in silence for a while, "I don't know if he's really dead." "Let's go down for a while," Roger said. "Okay," Luffy shouted. Roger first looked around. The previous battle destroyed the original lifting device on the top of the mountain. But soon his eyes were on the wreckage of the air mobile fortresses that had been shot down before. After several aerial mobile fortresses were shot down before, those huge hot air balloons were not destroyed. "I have an idea," Roger said while rushing towards a huge deflated hot air balloon. Sanji and the others also looked at each other, and then followed. The five people arrived at the side of the shriveled hot air balloon, which had a grey texture. The hot air balloon cover is made of a composite fiber, which is very strong. "Could it be that you want to use these hot air balloon covers as parachutes?" Sanji asked. "Exactly, but it still needs some tailoring," Roger said. "Leave it to me," Sauron stepped forward and said. Sauron, who has excellent swordsmanship, is also extremely efficient referring to these. After falling at a high speed and roughly which parts Sauron needs to cut off, Sauron started to work. Sauron drew out two blades, aimed at the cover of the hot air balloon and slashed in a daze. The original huge hot air balloon cover was cut in half, leaving only the upper half and 5 thicker strips, which looked like a huge parachute. "Okay, grab these hot air balloon covers. Let's go down together," Rog said. "Okay," Dalton and Sanji also said in response. 5 people worked together to bring the hot air balloon cover to the edge of the summit. "Call 1, 2, 3, let's jump down together," Rog said. 1 2 3. After 3 beeps, the 5 of them jumped down together. Snowflakes were flying on the top of the multi-meter high mountain, and the 5 people took huge parachutes and landed downwards. Roger and Dalton felt the wind and snow surrounding them. This feeling was only felt when I came up on the huge vines. The previous time was breaking through the sky, like ascending to the sky. This time it is comparable to a fairy coming down to earth. "It's really spectacular," Sanji exclaimed. "It was fun." Luffy shook his body happily. "Idiot, if you move like this, you'll lose your balance," Zoro scolded Luffy. Dalton remained silent and looked down. Here you can clearly see the whole picture of the Drum Kingdom. This land is where Dalton fought until now. Rog looked down, and now the height keeps dropping. And there may be extremely fierce battles below. Meanwhile, in the surrounding area below the central peak, Usopp, Nami, and Vivi are observing the mountain. Some of Wapol's men were also with them. "Look, something is coming down." Wei Wei pointed to the huge parachute that descended from the top of the mountain. "What is that?" "It can't be Rog and the others," Nami said. "Let me see," Usopp said. The long-nosed man pulled the goggles off his hat. Using the goggles, Usopp saw Roger, Sanji and others under the huge parachute. "It's true that they came down," Usopp said happily. One of Dalton's men quickly asked, "So, is Mr. Dalton down?" Of course, all 5 of them survived. But the yak like Dalton seemed to have recovered from his injuries, Usopp said. Anyway, he survived. Dalton's men rushed to deliver the message. They knew everything about the king's army gathering troops to reinforce the top of the mountain. In that case, plus the solidity of the Golden Palace. They all said some confidence had been shaken. Mr. Dalton, and Mr. Roger, and Mr. Sanji. They all survived. The crowd started to cheer. At this time, Usopp looked at an area at the foot of the mountain again. Just now a huge object fell down, everyone was startled. That was something terrifying. Usopp and the others felt an inexplicable sense of danger. At the place where the iron Tyrannosaurus Wapol fell before. Some of the king's troops looked at this falling behemoth in surprise. "What the hell is going on?" a colonel of the king's army said in surprise. "This monster fell from the top of the mountain," another officer of the king's army said. "Is this a Tyrannosaurus made of steel?" another king's army officer said. "These king's army are extremely fearful. Because this fallen steel Tyrannosaurus is not only huge and scary. What's even more terrifying is that his head actually looks like Wapol's head." Even the steel Tyrannosaurus Wapol suffered a serious impact due to falling from the top of a multi-meter high mountain. After a period of coma, the iron Tyrannosaurus Wapol regained consciousness. The huge eyes of the steel Tyrannosaurus Wapol suddenly opened, frightening the surrounding king's army to tremble for a while. "It hurts." The steel Tyrannosaurus Wapol struggled to stand up again and roared. This gigantic creature regained its footing. Its 10-meter-tall body, which was as black as steel, made all the creatures around it smaller. Steel Tyrannosaurus Wapol moved his body and felt that his huge body had been hurt a lot. There were cracks in some of the black steel in the legs, torso, back, and head. More importantly, the internal body suffered more severe trauma. However, the seriously injured Tyrannosaurus is far superior to the tiger. The iron Tyrannosaurus Wapol clenched his teeth and roared into the sky. At this time, Rog and Dalton had landed more than 1,000 meters in the air on huge parachutes. Hearing this earth-shattering roar, Rog and Dalton looked at the steel Tyrannosaurus Wapol, who stood up again. Sure enough, even with a height of more than meters, he wouldn't be able to fall to death, Dalton said. "What a monster," Sanji said. "How much steel and weapons he ate to become so strong," Sauron said. "It's time to fight on the ground again," Luffy said. "It seems that we need to kill him completely. Now is the real decisive battle," Rog said. The huge parachute carrying 5 people continued to descend. The steel Tyrannosaurus Wapol also saw Rog and the others landing again. Pirate Plant Fruit. Author, Lee A Dream. Chapter 116. "Okay, you pirates, and Dalton. I will make your corpses disappear," the steel Tyrannosaurus Wapol roared angrily. Then the iron Tyrannosaurus Wapol looked at the surrounding king's army. Before Jess died, he urgently ordered a large number of the king's army to gather under the central mountain. 4,000 to 5,000 of them arrived at the top of the mountain to support and were annihilated. Jace himself was killed in battle. And those troops are the most elite troops in the king's army of Drum Kingdom. After Jace's death, there were still about king's troops who remained in the area below the central peak and were still on standby. Now that the iron Tyrannosaurus Wapol has fallen, these kings are still on standby. The iron Tyrannosaurus Wapol looked at these king's troops, although these were second-line troops. But there is still value that can be used. "Commanders of the king's army, yes, I am King Wapol. The reason why I look like this now is because I have swallowed a large number of weapons and changed my body shape. But I am still your king," Iron Tyrannosaurus Wapol said in a very high-pitched voice. The surrounding king's army saw the iron Tyrannosaurus Wapol, and after hearing what he said, they quickly started making noise. "His Majesty Wapol is still alive. This is His Majesty Wapol, he is so powerful. Unbelievable. Your Majesty Wapol is a person with the ability to swallow fruits. It is indeed possible to swallow them. It's really scary." The soldiers of the king's army were full of discussions. However, some senior military officers quickly recovered. More than a dozen senior officers with the rank of colonel rushed to the front of the steel Tyrannosaurus Walpole on horseback. "Meet His Majesty Walpole." The officers took the lead in saluting, and immediately afterward, the junior officers and soldiers of the King's army also rushed to salute. "Your Majesty Walpole." The iron Tyrannosaurus Wabble was immediately saluted by the thousands of troops around him. The megalomaniac in the tyrant's heart flared up again. After the iron Tyrannosaurus Walpole devoured a large number of weapons, his temperament became more unstable after turning into the iron Tyrannosaurus form. "Well done, soldiers. The drum country is in critical condition. Dalton and the pirates want to destroy this country. So you need to do your best to fight the enemy. After that, everyone will be able to those who have meritorious service, and the kingdom will surely enjoy glory and wealth." Iron Tyrannosaurus Walpole spoke these impassioned words very timely. The king's words still have a huge motivational effect on the king's army. These king's army quickly filled with fighting spirit. "Long live His Majesty Walpole!" The soldiers of the king's army shouted together. The cheers were so loud that anyone could be terrified. Now that the steel Tyrannosaurus Walpole is coming to the battle, the morale of these second-line troops is also greatly boosted. Moreover, although these more than people are second-line troops, they are still equipped with a large number of artillery, heavy machine guns, carriages, and cavalry. They are only second to the troops led by Jess to support the top of the mountain in drum country, but their combat effectiveness is not too bad. The iron Tyrannosaurus Walpole was also happy for a while to see the morale-boosted king's army around him. "My army, get ready to fight and destroy the enemy," the iron Tyrannosaurus Walpole gave the order. Thousands of royal troops quickly began to load their weapons again, ready to fight. The 5 Rogs used huge parachutes to land successfully. Rog looked at the steel Tyrannosaurus Walpole and the king's army around him. It was another bloody battle, and the battle fought on the ground must have been extremely tragic. It is definitely no less than the previous battle on the top of the mountain, and it will even be more tragic. "Everyone, the fierce battle is about to begin again," Rog said. "Here's the final break with Wapoli," Dalton said. "Fighting here is wider than the top of the mountain," Sanji said, lighting a cigarette butt. "Will my sword become dull?" "But you are very sharp, so it is unlikely." Zoro touched the scabbard and said. "Keep fighting," Luffy shouted. The 5 of Rog looked in the direction of the iron Tyrannosaurus Walpole, and the iron Tyrannosaurus Walpole, who had fallen from a mountain of more than 5,000 meters and was still alive, was now leading an army to kill them. The king's army first used 400 cannons to aim at Rog's position. There was a thunderous cannon sound, and hundreds of shells flew over like raindrops. These shells covered Rog's area. The artillerymen of the king's army fired again after a round of shelling. This was repeated more than 30 times. More than artillery shells were fired at Rog's position. Not only where Rog and the others were located, but also the vast snowfield in front of the king's army artillery was violently bombed. The huge artillery sound triggered avalanches in some surrounding valleys. And the ice layers on the rock wall of the central mountain were cracked and fell off a lot. After such a fierce shelling by the king's army, the cannons were also hot and needed a rest. "Your Majesty Walpole, our army has continued to bombard tens of thousands of shells," an officer reported to the steel Tyrannosaurus Wapoli. The steel Tyrannosaurus Walpole looked at the snowfield where the smoke had not yet cleared. "They won't die so easily," iron Tyrannosaurus Walpole said. Before the thick smoke and snowflakes dissipated on the snowfield, 5 figures rushed out suddenly. The officers and soldiers of the king's army were stunned. "What? They're not dead yet?" The 5 of Rog quickly charged on the snowfield, without being hurt by the devastating shelling just now. In fact, Rog used a stump he found just now to create a basement more than 10 meters deep for everyone to hide in. Only then did the 5 people escape the shelling just now. The 5 Rogs rushed towards the king's army. "First, we need to get rid of these cannons on the other side." "Is there any problem?" Rog said. "No problem, Dalton," and the others said. The five quickly rushed to the position of the king's army cannons. Rog jumped up first and hit the two artillerymen hard, smashing them into meat pies. "Oh my God, these enemies are coming!" the artillerymen of the king's army shouted in shock. Some Royal Artillery quickly drew their rifles and sabers to resist. Rog ignored them, and quickly picked up a box of shells. And after one of them was mechanically ignited with the enemy's firearms, the whole box of shells was thrown to more cannons. A violent explosion sounded for a while. More than a dozen cannons were destroyed. Zoro also rushed into the enemy's artillery. He waved his hands and chopped down Yokozuka and Kaititsu. The enemy's artillery flew blood and flesh all over for a while, and their heads rolled down one by one. Dalton and Sanji also rushed into the cannon position, and Dalton swung the iron halberd to overturn the enemy. Sanji used his powerful feet to ignite the enemy's artillery shells with torches, kick them up and blow up more artillery units. Luffy used his rubber ability to move dazzledly among the artillery positions for a while, disrupting the enemy and killing them everywhere. The five Rog quickly disintegrated the artillery positions of the king's army.